So good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's Disability Living Allowance for Children session. So a very big thank you to the Royal Voluntary Service for inviting us across. So today we're going to be really focusing on one of the most underclaimed benefits in the UK, and we'll have a look at some of the reasons why and some of the challenges that people do face with Disability Living Allowance for Children. So thank you for joining us. If we could just move on to the next slide there. So just to introduce myself, so my name's Adam Matthews. I'm the Social Delivery Manager at Society Matters. So my background is as a benefit specialist. So I've spent many years working with Citizens Advice, wearing many hats for Citizens Advice. So I've got a lot of experience of filling in forms, working with mandatory reconsiderations and appeals when it comes to the disability benefits. So Disability Living Allowance for Children, which we'll be focusing on today, obviously personal independence payment, which is a session we'll be looking at further down the line, attendance allowance as well. But today our main focus is going to be Disability Living Allowance for Children, which is a benefit from children aged from birth up until the age of 16. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So a little bit of background around ourselves at Society Matters. So we're actually a trading subsidiary of Citizens Advice Gateshead. So what we do is we're very lucky to have lots of expertise. We have benefit specialists, housing specialists, employment specialists. We use all that knowledge to mobilise knowledge across the UK. So the more people that we can reach out to, the more people can support with complex issues such as supporting people with welfare benefits, which we'll be looking at today with DLA for Children, the challenges that people face and how to overcome them. We're very proud to have worked with over 350 organisations, of course the Royal Voluntary Service being one of them, but you can see some of the organisations that we've worked with there on the screen. So we're very much about social value and mobilising that knowledge that we have as well. And thank you very much for joining us today. So a little bit about today's session. So please do, if you do have any questions, do fire them away. I will be keeping an eye on the chat. We're due to run for about half an hour, but I have left plenty of time at the end of the session for any questions that you may have, and I'll do my best to answer them, of course. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And if we could just move on to the next slide itself. I will be mentioning some links, which my colleague will be popping into the chat box that you may find useful as we do go through the course itself. You might find that useful if you're joining today and you're having some challenges yourself, or a family member or a friend or a colleague when it comes to DLA for Children. So please do keep an eye out for them. So our aim and learning objectives of this morning, we're going to have a look at what is the eligibility criteria, so what type of children may be eligible. We'll have a look at the application process, and I'll give you some tips around filling in the dreaded form. It is a 34-page form itself, but I'll try and break that down as best as possible for you. We'll have a look at what the daytime and the nighttime test is. So a lot of people aren't aware of this. This is very much what the DWP decision maker is going to be looking out for. So does that child have needs that are both daytime or nighttime? If that is the case, potentially we'd be looking at a higher rate. Is it either daytime or nighttime? We'd be looking at the middle rate. And if it's just a few times a day, we'd be looking at the lower rate itself. So we'll break that down into sizable chunks. We'll have a look at what supporting evidence is recommended. Lots of people get the form. It does kind of in the small print say it's a good idea to send supporting evidence, but a lot of people think, the DWP are going to chase up that evidence with GPs, paediatricians, etc. Quite often they don't. So it's a really good idea to really watertight your claim and provide that supporting evidence with the initial claim. And then we'll have a look at what other benefits, passported benefits, potentially that you will be entitled to if you are entitled to DLA for Children as well. So really important, once there is an entitlement, to kind of do a full benefit check again just to make sure that people are getting everything that they're entitled to on top of DLA for children. So it does lead to higher payments of universal credit, potentially in some cases, that are quite significant and are going to make a big difference to people that maybe you may be supporting, or your family, yourself as well. And then, of course, we will have that time for questions and answers at the end there as well. Okay, thank you. If we could move on to the next slide. So what is DLA for children? So it is a benefit that's there for children aged from birth to 16. It is one of the most underclaimed benefits. And the reason behind that is lots of people perhaps don't see their children to have a disability or a long-term health condition. Lots of people think it needs to be a physical disability. If you actually look at the DWP statistics, the most claimants that are children actually have conditions that might be related to SEND or special educational needs. It could be potentially in a lot of cases as well that it's neurodiverse conditions as well. So there's lots of misconceptions around, who would qualify. And we'll have a look at what the DWP decision maker will be looking for as we go through this webinar today. So any ill or disabled child might qualify. You don't actually have to have a diagnosis to make a claim. Lots of people, as we know, are waiting for diagnosis. It can take a long time for children to get a diagnosis. If we have what would be classed as a potential diagnosis, we just need to basically prove that that child has more challenges than a child at the same age that potentially doesn't have that condition. That's what the DWP is going to be looking for, or that potential condition. So they have more challenges, and that could be daily living challenges or mobility challenges as well, which we'll look at a little bit later. It's absolutely a non-means tested benefit as well. So it doesn't actually matter if you've got £0 or £1 million in the bank. Doesn't matter if you're working. It's non-means tested. So you just need to meet the qualifying conditions of the benefit itself, basically. It's not like universal credit, where if you've got £16,000 more or savings, you're not going to be entitled. Really importantly, Disability Living Allowance for children, it's not going to take anything away. It's probably going to add more to somebody's benefit entitlement. So just to give you an example, if you were to qualify for what's called the severely disabled child rate on universal credit, that would mean that you're getting the highest rate for the care component of DLA for children, which we'll be looking at shortly. So that can make a difference of around £450 per month, which is really going to make a difference. As we know, lots of families struggling at the moment. Scope actually did some research, and they found the cost of bringing a severely disabled child up would be up to £1,000 a month more compared to a child that doesn't have a severe disability or a long-term health condition. So that's really going to make a difference for parents and people that are responsible for children there as well. We will be popping a link in the chat on the eligibility criteria if you continue to follow us on there. And if we could just move on to the next slide there as well. So in terms of, again, what is DLA for children? So it's there to help with the extra costs of looking for a child who's aged under 16. If they were to become over the age of 16, it would have to be personal independence payment that we were looking at. So they can be aged from birth to 16. They must have difficulties walking or need much more looking after than a child of the same age who does not have a disability or condition. So that's what the Department for Work and Pensions will always be looking for. They'll be comparing that child's condition or suspected condition compared to a child of the same age that doesn't have that condition. And that's something that we really need to be stressing when we're looking at the application forms and the application process, which we'll be looking at very shortly. And it's there to support families that need help with that extra cost of bringing up a child with a disability themselves. So as we've just mentioned, them costs can be really, really high. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. Thank you. So just Looking at that in more detail, the eligibility itself. So just to remember, the child will need to be aged under 16. They will need that extra looking after supervision, or have walking or mobility difficulties. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions around the mobility component, which we'll be looking at shortly. So really important, it's not just about physical mobility. If that child, compared to a child of the same age that doesn't have that condition, is likely to have no awareness of road danger or stranger danger, would potentially wander off, then there should be some element of the mobility component potentially in them circumstances. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail shortly. The child will need to be located in Great Britain, or in an EEA country, or Switzerland when they claim. There are some exceptions, such as family members of the forces. Usually you'd have to be in the UK unless you were a member of the armed forces themselves. In most cases, you need to pass what's called the past and presence test. So you would need to have lived in the UK for the last 2 out of the last 3 years, if that child is aged over 3 years old. If that child was to have refugee status, for example, and was aged under 3, there are circumstances where they would be paid DLA for children in them circumstances. So you do need to be what's called habitually resident in the UK. So you need to prove that you plan to stay in the UK, and you can't be subject to immigration control. So you need to have what the government would call recourse to public funds. There are additional rulings on eligibility for refugee status, as we mentioned. If you are supporting people that do have refugee status, I really would recommend getting support from a benefit specialist. And that's something that we would be able to help with at your local citizens' advice in them circumstances. Okay, and if we could just move on to the next slide. So what are the DWP looking for? So the child's disability or health condition must mean at least one of the following apply. And this will apply in a lot of cases of people that you may come across or be supporting. They need much more looking after than a child of the same age who does not have a disability, or that specific disability, or suspected disability or long-term health condition. They have difficulty getting around, so not just physical mobility. Of course, if a child would need the use of the wheelchair, we'd be looking at the highest rate for mobility. But again, if that child, compared to a child of the same age, was likely to be not have awareness of road danger or stranger danger, they would just wander off. That might be a case there for mobility in them cases as well. So that getting around is not just physically getting around, but of course that plays a huge part of it. One thing the DWP do look out for is the child must have had that disability or condition for at least 3 months, and you must expect it to last for 6 or more. What I would say is don't let that put you off making an application. If it's a condition that's very much likely to last more than 6 months, then it's best to get the application in as soon as possible, because in varying degrees, depending on how much medical evidence that you do provide, which we'll be talking about shortly, you know, that application itself could take up to 12 months in some areas to process itself. So it's best to watertight that claim, get as much supporting evidence as possible, get as much as you can on the form, and get that application out as soon as possible. And there is support from organisations such as Contact. They have a really good guide, which is in the links that we will be popping out in there. And also as well, there is some support with the application form in the links, which will be popping into the chat box itself. So it can be a difficult process to follow, but again, it's something we could help with at your local citizens' advice as well. Okay, if we just move on to the next slide. So to make that application, where do we start? So you can actually call up the Disability Living Allowance helpline and ask for a printed form. That would be the best recommended way of doing things for me. The reason for that is the claim will be backdated if you're successful to the day you actually made that initial phone call. If you weren't successful with your initial application and you were to challenge that decision, so what we would call the mandatory reconsideration, which means another DWP decision maker would look at that decision itself and make a decision themselves, or the appeal process, which means an individual tribunal would look at that process. Then still, if you were successful at that stage, and a lot of people are, again, it would get backdated to the day that you made that initial phone call itself. You can alternatively just print off and fill in the DLA form from the government website, and we'll be popping that in the links for you. There is the Disability Living Allowance helpline itself with the government. They don't tend to give much advice. However, if you are claiming under the special rules, which means a child has less than 12 months of a life expectancy, which we would be looking at very shortly, then there is that 0800 121 4600 number there at the bottom. And that was something I would recommend using if you are going to be using what's called the special rules, which we'll be covering very shortly there as well. But the most highly recommended way I would definitely recommend is to phone the DLA form and get that form sent out, because it does get backdated to the day. You do have a month to fill in that form, but you can ask for more time if you need it. I wouldn't rush the form. We'll give you some tips in just a moment. If you're thinking about making a claim, I'd recommend starting to gather all that supporting medical evidence as soon as possible. Okay. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So them special rules, and this will be a really difficult, challenging time for families. If a child is found to have less than a 12 months life expectancy, so if a child is terminally ill, we can ask a doctor or any other healthcare professional for what's called the SR1 form. That SR1 form will cover the care component itself, which we'll be looking at shortly. It should mean that they automatically get the highest rate. There's no guarantee of the mobility, unfortunately, so still worth filling in that part of the form itself. But if you do claim under the special rules, that means that the application goes through much quicker than a normal claim, and so it should do. So it should be completed within around 2 weeks itself. And there is a link out there about the special rules, which will be popping into the chat box. So children that are terminally ill will be a difficult time for the family. They will have more expenses, traveling to hospitals, etc. So that will make a big difference. So just a reminder that them special rules are out there for children that have a life expectancy of less than 12 months. Thank you. If we just move on to the next slide. So there is 2 components, and they're paid at different rates, which we'll look at very shortly. The care component looks at the child's supervision and care needs. There is a lower, a higher, and a middle rate for that. And for the mobility, there is 2 different components to them. So depending on the child's condition, you might get one or both components, depending on the type of care supervision that child needs. You will only have to make one application itself. Okay, so if we just have a look at the rates on the next slide. So you can see there for the care component and the higher rate, the way it works to break it down, the child must have significant both daytime and nighttime needs. So it could be that child needs constant supervision during the day, but they also need constant supervision during the night as well. Otherwise, there'd be a risk to themselves or others without realizing it. So you might have to check on them 9 or 10 times during the night to make the safe, and you need to be at arm's length all day just to make sure that they don't hurt themselves. And remember, you're comparing to a child of the same age that doesn't have that condition. If that's the case, we'd be going for the higher rate. For the middle rate, there's no crossover. It's either daytime or nighttime. So they might need constant supervision during the day, but they don't need any supervision or care during the nighttime itself. So the higher rate would get you that severely disabled child rate on universal credit. So that's significant, around £450 a month. The middle rate gets you what's called the disabled child rate. So around the 180 mark there itself. So still makes a big difference. The lower rate for the care component is if that child's needs are just once or twice a day. So it may be a certain type of medication that they need to take, but they're not significant needs what the DWP would class as significant needs. So that will get you the lower rate of £29.20. And unfortunately, that wouldn't add anything on to the other benefit rates themselves. For the mobility, for the low rate, it could be that that child is able to walk, but scuffs their feet, they get breathless, they need to take longer to get to a destination with lots of rests. It could be that that child potentially has no awareness of road danger or stranger danger, so needs to hold hands everywhere they go or constant supervision. For the higher rate, the child perhaps needs the use of a wheelchair or doesn't have the use of their legs, would be the higher rate itself. So you can see there's a more significant payment of £77.05 per week there. Okay, and if we could just move on to the next slide. So just some tips on filling in the form itself. It can be a very daunting form. And this is in the links that we will be popping into the chat box there today. Really good idea to keep a diary of the child's care needs. That can really help answer the questions. I would send that diary off as well. And there is a copy of the diary that you can use in the chat box there. That diary really does give a DWP a decision an insight into if, them care needs are both daytime and nighttime, how long they take. If you can keep a diary for 2 weeks, that's really good evidence that you can use itself. We would recommend trying to fill the form over a few sessions rather than doing it all at once. It is a lengthy form. They don't give you much space in the boxes. So quite often with an application, you will be using extra forms of A4. It's best to give as much detail as possible. How often does a child need the support? Is it both daytime and nighttime? What challenges has that child have in the past? Give your histories, what's gone wrong? What would happen if you weren't there to give that support is really important as well. So all things that are going to take up a lot of space that aren't really you're not given the space on the form itself. So please don't consign yourself to the boxes on the form itself. You can get support from Welfare Benefits Advisor. Obviously, organisations and citizens advice contact are really good as well. Don't just use the tick boxes on the form. As we mentioned, just give as much information and real life examples as well. Give the insight to that child's support and care needs that they have and the mobility challenges. So the DWP's got as much information as possible. Really important to focus on the care they need because of their disability rather than the care they need because of their age as well. So remember, you're comparing to a child of the same age who does not have that condition to the DWP. Really, really important. Okay, if we could just move on to the next slide. One thing that we see quite often, question 38, if you want to have a look, the form will be popped into the chat box for you in the links. But a lot of people do miss this part out. So it kind of makes out, you don't have to fill this part in, but it does give a really good insight into the support that child needs. So it is a statement from someone that knows the child. That could be you as the parent, it could be a carer, it could be a teacher, it could be a health professional, a social worker, a specialist or a paediatrician. So, could be paid carers, but it could actually be a relative or a friend as well. But really important, we tend to recommend keeping a carer's diary, as we mentioned, alongside that as well. But lots of people tend to miss this question when you can give a really good insight to that child's challenges and needs there as well. Okay, and if we could just move on to the next slide. So we've mentioned about the benefit add-ons. So it's worth getting a full benefit check once there is an entitlement to DLA for children. So you can actually get higher payments or become entitled to the following benefits depending on what rate of DLA for children you do get. So it is a benefit can add on to housing benefit for people still on housing benefit or for people over state pensionable age that aren't on universal credit and they need support with their housing costs. As we've mentioned, so if you get that highest rate, you get the severely disabled child rate of universal credit. So we're at the £450 mark, which will make a big difference. If you were to get that middle rate, it will get you the disabled child rate as well. So that's still going to make a big difference. It does make an exemption from the benefit cap as well. And it does mean that if a child was to get the middle or the higher rate, that you would be potentially entitled to carers allowance and the carers element of universal credit as well, for people that joined us on the universal credit sessions that we had before. So is a qualifying benefit, and a lot of parents will be caring over 35 hours a week for their own children as well. So this is why it's really important to get a full benefit check once there is an entitlement to DLA for children itself. Okay, thank you. And if we just move on to the next slide. So that brings us on to any questions. So I hope everybody's got something out of today's session. So we've got 5 minutes if anybody does have any questions or any comments that they want to make. Still some time if people do have any questions. If people are interested to learn more on Disability Living Allowance for children, you can check out our website. We do run a half-day course on Disability Living Allowance for children, which is a very popular course. A lot of people that do support people with welfare benefits, but also people that are struggling with that application process as well. So if that's something that people are interested, you can check that out on our website. Okay. So it doesn't look like anybody's got any questions. We will keep an eye on the feed. Just want to say huge thank you to everybody that has joined us today, or if you're catching up with us later down the line. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to our next session with the Royal Voluntary Service. Thank you very much for having us today. Thank you.